My name is Don Toon. I live in Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm a lifelong rail fan. My mom used to say when she introduced me to people when I was growing up that if they kind of hinged my head open, there would just be a little locomotive running around in circles. So as soon as I could ride my bike or get a license, I was out chasing trains. I want to welcome you to my railroad family. This show is basically my first decade, my first 9 years of rail fanning. I was extremely lucky to have uh, railroad employees in my family that kind of helped me along with my um, rail fanning process. That's the name I've put for my presenting company. No crying towels are provided. Sorry. There's a lot of good stuff. I hope you guys like it as much. This was a 2-hour show that I did for the NRHS group in Indianapolis, and I printed back, cut off some stuff, but it's still a good show. So I'm a lifelong photographer. This just gives you a real quick overview. I started out as a yearbook photographer when I was a sophomore in high school. Uh, had a Pentax Spotmatic K. Um, it got me through some things. My dad loaned me his Kodak Retina 3A that he got when he was in the Army in Korea. In Germany. It was promptly stolen out of my glove box before my first roll of film was exposed. Somebody liked it. Um, from there, I went on to IU in college. I worked as a professional photographer for my gap year. So those are some of my cameras. So my first railroad trip this is actually my second railroad trip. My first railroad trip was when I was in elementary school. We took a trip from Acton, Indiana on the Big Four Cincinnati line to Shelbyville and return, my whole grade school class. So it was the start of being hooked. But my Uncle Harry, I had three great uncles who were engineers on New York Central, one on the Gant side, two on the Simon side. And this is a Riley Boosters Club trip that my Uncle Harry and my Aunt Harriet took me on to Chicago and back. They stopped at Lafayette Station on the return side, and I was introduced to a fellow by the name of Bud McMahon, who was an engineer on the Riley, and he was also a photographer. He took 4x5 speed graphic, black and white images almost exclusively, and was really a wonderful photographer and a great mentor for me. There I am in 1975, the first IC Eagle toured the Indianapolis subdivision to Effingham, and while it was in Bloomington, they allowed me to climb up in the cab and have a friend snap a picture. So I just retired in 2023 from construction supply sales. I was 45 years in that industry. My wife was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and it didn't make any sense for me to continue to try to work full time. She's made some progress. She's still with us. Thank God. I've continued to photograph rail subjects. I've presented at some rail 3 times. I've been digital since 2001. I'm a railroad historian. I'm the incoming president of the Monon Railroad Historical Society in September at our annual meeting. I do a lot of paper and digital archiving. I'm part of Dave Orsey's Dipshits out of Dayton, Ohio. Railway and Locomotive Historical Society member, Railfanning of Indianapolis, Indy chapter of NRHS, Center for Railway Photography and Art, and then New York Central Society, B&O Society, GM&O Society, PC, and EC&I societies. 1970s was a decade of first, not necessarily in the order of importance. I got my first driver's license in 1970. I got my first full-time job about 6 weeks after I got my license. I bought a Rambler. My dad helped me buy a Rambler for $600. It was baby shit blue. It was the ugliest thing, but it got me a job. So that's the main thing. I talked about my cameras a little bit earlier, and I had my first cab ride. I had my first cab ride on the Riley. My family was coming back. I don't have the year. I don't have any photographs. I'm not sure why I didn't have my camera. Or I may have had my Instamatic, but it was a night It was a night run from Chicago to Indy. And we were talking to the conductor on the train. His name was Mr. Hurley. And when he found out I was a rail fan, he walked me up through the train into the 2E units when we were on the nickel plate tangent between Templeton and Altamont, and we were running 79 mile an hour at night. It was freaking awesome. Yeah. As a first cab ride, I don't know that you could get any better. So also, it was the first major close family member that I had that we lost. My Uncle Harry was a 40-year engineer for New York Central. He ran P&E east of Springfield. That was his route for 15 years. And he had a grand mal seizure. He was working the switch engines in Avon Yard at the twilight of his career. He had a grand mal seizure, and 3 days later he died. So unfortunately, the only cab ride I got with him was there was a trio of SW1s that were the hump pullers for a while at Avon, and I got about a 600-foot ride with him, and that's my only cab ride with my Uncle Harry. There's my first systematic camera, a brand spanking new X15, and I carried that thing everywhere. A huge thanks to the people who helped me in this trade. Bob McCord was a 38 or 39-year employee, New York Central, Penn Central, Conrail. He was an operator, worked all over the system. IJ, Ames, Marion Tower, Indianapolis Union Depot, you name it. He was all over during first, second, and third tricks, and he helped me tremendously. He was also a wonderful photographer. Dennis Meeker, who's also passed away, he was a train master for the Illinois Central Gulf at Indianapolis, and he let me have the run of the yard and told me everything that was going on, and I'll explain a little bit about that later. He eventually ended up on the Spencerville and Elgin over here in Ohio, and then he was on the Terre Haute, Brazil, and Eastern when they closed it in 1977 or 78. Bob Fredericks, who was a Pennsylvania engineer, he toted my butt all over the place. He got me into Hawthorne Yard. He got me into places that a 16-year-old with a license is not going to be able to get. Talked about Bud. We'll talk more about him later. Dennis Dunkman and his dad, Jim Dunkman. He took our little butts to Chicago, to Bloomington, Illinois, to Joliet, Illinois. He was just a wonderful rail fan dad. He was also a photographer. Then we've got a cast of characters coming up. Some of these names you'll recognize. Ron Potch was an IC operator in Bloomington. Gary Dozal is still involved in railway publications. Him and his brother Steve published the 2 Monon books and the Baldwin book, and a number of other Countback. He went to work for Countback. He went to IU. Two of the 5 years that I was at Indiana University, he was there. And then Mike Schaefer, you guys will recognize the Mike Schaefer name. He was part of our merry band of railway photographers. He lived in Waukesha at the time, but he would come down to see Gary in Bloomington. This is an east trip that we took. Lon Daly, who's the brother of Kevin Daly, who's the owner of White River Publications, a fellow by the name of Lance Mendheim, who now runs a custom model company out of Maryland. There's Ron again. Dick Koenig is a professor of fine arts at Kalamazoo College. His head's down, so I got more pictures of him coming up. So there's Potch again, there's Dozel, and there's me with my trusty 4x5 speed graphic that I learned how to shoot in my gap year. Got lots of 4x5 negatives. So there's Koenig. I had to put him in there because he had his hood down. So there's my trusty my second car, trusty 1970 Galaxy 500 with a trunk big enough you could put 3 dead bodies in. So lots of camping gear. And Bob McCord really was a wonderful. I'll tell a little story. This is at IU Tower, but he worked IJ for a long time, and you'll see pictures of IJ. One night, Bud McMahon saw me on the platform at IJ Tower and stopped his train and said, "Do you want a cab ride?" Yeah, where, when, where do I start? So anyway, so I got on the engine with him to go out west on the P&E. Bob did not know that I got on the engine. 3 hours passed. My car's there. I'm nowhere to be found. He calls my mom at home and said, "Don's We don't know where Don is. His car's here, and he's not. Of course, my mom's got the police out, the state police out, and I'm just merrily chugging along on an SW 1500 on the P&E. So Bob was great. We miss him. He passed away he passed away 3 years after he retired. So anyway, the decade of the 70s, big deal. Bankruptcy of Penn Central. Amtrak comes into existence in 71. The Ellen and Monon merger in 71. C&O, Western Maryland in 73. Illinois Central and Gulf. ICG in 72. Then the 4R Act hits. Penn Central's bankrupt, continues to work its way through the courts. Eventually, the 4R Act, Conrail is created, and all hell breaks loose. Abandonment proposals are moved forward to the USRA. The USRA prints that big book in 3 sections or 4 sections, and we all go, oh shit, our railroads are going away. So also the US Bicentennial, which I was wonderful to be able to participate and shoot some of those locomotives. So here was my personal mocked up copies of the USRA guide. The blue lines are the lines that I had ridden by that point in 1976. And then the red lines are all the lines that were pretty much immediately going to go away when Conrail was created. We all know that there was far more blood than this. This is just a quick overview. I told Bill Boone, it turns out Bill Boone, I was the resident assistant on Curry 2 in IU Bloomington when Bill was a resident of my floor. So we reconnected today after 45 years. He's a longtime Cincinnati Railroad Club member. So I told him, since I did this for the NRHS group in Indianapolis, all those people knew where everything was. So I did a lot of maps for you guys so you can kind of get a feel for where I was going. So these are some of the trips we're going to take in this that 70s show. So home rails for 4 years was Indianapolis when I started driving in 71 through 75 when I went to IU Bloomington. Indianapolis, B&O, PC, Indianapolis Union, Illinois Central Gulf. This shows Indianapolis in 1977, right around merger time. This is just a quick overview showing the belt. I've got a picture there. So this shows you the Indianapolis Union Railway, which was owned by the member railroad. So it was there were shares owned by the Monon, the Norfolk and Western, the B&O, the Pennsy, and the New York Central. And they had shares depending on the amount of mileage. And they all paid into the Indianapolis Union, paid mileage to run and operate the Indianapolis Union, which owned and operated the station. So this shows back in the good old days, shows the Monon coming in from the north. They quit being the Monon at Belt Junction. Basically, their tracks extended to Mass Avenue. The green is the nickel plate, the Lake Erie and Western coming in from Tipton. The B line is the yellow going northwest. The yellow, I guess I can walk around. Gotta remember. Oh shit! Don't do that. Wrong button. There we go. So this is the old Indianapolis, New York's the big 4 main line from downtown. This is the B&O, Morfield Yard. This is the New York Central to St. Louis. This is the Pennsy to St. Louis. This is the Illinois Central Gulf. This is the Indianapolis and Vincennes branch of the Pennsylvania, which originally came all the way down and connected that town. This is your wonderful Cincinnati line in New York Central and Big 4. This is Hawthorne Yard, which was a 60s addition to Pennsy, and then this is the Pennsy Columbus line. This was a home rail. This was about 6 or 8 miles from my house. The American Aggregates had a huge plant. They still have a big plant right off 465. Oh, I got to talk. Sorry, Jonathan. Got to remind me. American Ag, as you drive 465 south of Indianapolis, you'll see this huge hill. That is the American Aggregates plant. Back in the day, they had 2 locomotives. They had this orange Whitcomb, which was beautiful. Orange is my favorite color. And then they had a interurban body that they put a Cummins motor in that towed cars around. And I couldn't find a picture of it, but this plant still exists. This is the closest crossing to my boyhood home. I grew up in Wanamaker, Indiana, on the Big 4. I can still remember torpedo boat, U-boats. When I was a little kid running the mail trains and the Riley and stuff down this line. Of course, it's a secondary line and closed to Greensburg now. This is one of my first pictures, and not necessarily my best pictures, but this is a Kodak that I digitally scanned and enhanced mightily because Instamatics are not great cameras, but thank goodness I got it. So there was a roadmaster by the name of Gene Gooding, and Dennis Duckman and I were there. This is at shops, the Indianapolis Union Railway Belt shops, and he pulled it out. It was dead. He pulled it out so we could take a last portrait of it, and it was 3 or 4 weeks later that it was hauled to David Joseph's in Beech Grove, and it was scrapped along with the Monon number 209. This is with my Pentax, my trusty Pentax that I got in 71. This was the south wind on the Louisville line to the ex-Pennsy Louisville line headed southbound. Garfield Park United Methodist Church. This is just my intro to Union Station, to the station, just a portrait. So the National Limited ran. I got some pictures of it. It typically ran late evening through Indy if it was on time, but then it was discontinued in 79 while I was at Bloomington at IU. You guys can stop me if you have questions. I don't mind answering questions. So this is I put a number of night shots in here. This is an allude to Mr. Zeman. I really enjoyed his show. Kudos to him for his current day digital work. We weren't so lucky. We didn't have all the wonderful ISO. This is Kodachrome 25 time exposure. We painted with light with Grayflex 25 Bs and 5B flash bulbs. So this was probably 3 or 4 flash bulbs on an open bulb shutter. And I got a number of those. We had a great time. We figured basically we had 12 hours of daylight if the sun was good, and then we had another 12 hours at night. So when you're 18, 19, 20 years old, you go wherever the trains are. We had a good time back when you could do those things. This is on the Cincy line at the B&O, eastbound at Ritter Avenue. Am I going too fast? This is a westbound on the Pennsy line to the Panhandle through Columbus. You can see in the distance the Indianapolis Union Railway is crossing at Pine. This is Pine on the Pennsy. This was the home signal for Pine, and we'll get to some shots of. So this is further in of that shot. You can see at this point it was still double track. It's crazy to think how long that line has been gone, but it is what it is. So the Indianapolis Union Railway had a number of industries they served on the east side. This is 2 1/4 square. I ran right on by my professional career. So my gap year, I was a professional photographer. I was telling Bill I shot headshots and graduation ceremonies and basketball games and football games and you name it. The nice part of it was I had my pick of Nikon 35 millimeters, speed graphics, Bronica 2 1/4 squares. I could borrow any piece of professional equipment I wanted, and then I could use the darkroom. I was the darkroom technician and the part-time photographer, so I did all my developing for free and all of my enlarging for free. So it was a great part-time job. So just recording the action at Pine. And, obviously this show is mostly in the Indy, it's mostly in 74, 75, 76. There's one of the Penn Central Green IU cabooses. Somebody threw some kind of paint at it. It's kind of interesting. It's splattered all over the extended vision window. So DX Tower was another favorite haunt. There was a J.J. Brockman and an I.B. Brockman. They were brothers. They worked this job a lot of times during second trick, and they were very Railfan friendly. Bob McCord actually worked this job for a while. This fellow, you can see standing there, watching the train. His last name was Russell, and he drove that little Ford Falcon that was sitting there. So Bud McMahon, just an absolute prince of a man. He was a big BL&E supporter. I don't know, I rode half a dozen cab rides, different short-term, long-term rates. He knew my Uncle Harry, and he kind of took me under his wing after my Uncle Harry passed. And I was just blessed to be able to spend so much time with such a nice man. You know, sitting in the fireman's seat, the fireman would stand up and I would ride in the fireman's seat and shoot, forwards, backwards, all around. So this particular day, the reason I put this next to DX is he was, after Riley came off, he was the most senior engineer. So he had what was called the Mass Avenue job, which was an 8 to 5 job that operated out of Avon up the Beeline to Mass Avenue, and then switched the industries, and then went back to Avon. So I'm standing, and he comes up and he stops the train at DX, and he goes, "Do you want a cab ride?" And I'm like, "Sure." I said, "Where are we going to go?" And he goes, "Oh, no, you're not with this engine." He goes, "There's a train coming in from Bellefontaine that's going to go on the Hogs. They're going to stop him at DX, and we're going to ferry him to Avon." And I'm like, "Hey, I'm in if you're in." So get on the engine. We took a wonderful trip, I've probably got way too many images, probably 150 images from DX to Avon. So I just threw in a couple. This is at the Big S curve right downtown. Literally, you can see on the left the approaches to I-65, the Washington Street ramp. Literally now, this is I-65, 4 lanes over the top of this. So you wouldn't obviously be able to get that shot. So we've passed Union Station. We're going to go down to Pincy. We're going to come up to Hunt, and through Hunt into Avon. So this is the home signal at Woods, this is the Indianapolis Union Belt crossing. Transfer yards in the distance. And here's just the end of the cab ride, arriving at NY Tower. I was talking to another local rail fan recently, and I'm like, I don't have any idea how I got home. I don't have any idea how I got back to DX. I'm assuming since they were going back to DX, the cabin car took all of us back to DX, but I don't have any recollection of how I got back. I didn't walk, because it would have been a hell of a walk. So another significant part of the early 70s for me was the Central Indiana Railroad Club, and we had a big layout on the 3rd floor of the B&O building, which was absolutely wonderful. They treated us great. The operator, the agent's name was Ora Richter. I'll never forget. He was like 80 years old, had all crippled fingers, and he just shuffled paper all day long. And his office was right in the middle of our layout. It's the craziest thing. I guess he must have sublet to the club his area of the. I was so young. I don't know who paid the bills. I don't know. I just know we ran trains. So out the window, out the 3rd floor window, as you can imagine, we got everything. We got the B&O, we got the Monon, we got the nickel plate, we got anybody that goes through downtown Indy. We're just sitting there looking out the windows. So I just showed a few pictures of some of the stuff that we saw in the 70s. B&O building long gone. It's all full of housing. There's this whole area. I've been doing some before and after pictures. It just blows your mind. The building in the background, the CN, you see the CN and the CP rail and the CN, that's the Monon Freight House. The Monon did the switching in that area. So we would occasionally get some kind of run-through trains. Alcos were not a frequent visitor to Indianapolis. It was pretty much Jeeps and U-boats. So it was a treat when we got big ones that are stationed in Mingo. And then we just wait for them to rev up so we could get the smoke. So another part of downtown that's long gone was that old main that came out of Union Station. So you can see down on the bottom, you can see Union Station, and you see the tracks bending up. From 1850 till 1977, this line existed, but it didn't exist for passenger service, but it existed as freight, and it ran right along the Central Canal. It was a beautiful piece of railroad, except when the canal overflowed. So this is the new Indianapolis Convention Center. This was the original, and now it's like 5 times the size. So, but this literally ran by the steps of the Capitol. You could sit on the steps of the Capitol and see this train. Now, why I didn't get that picture? Time is left me. So here's a real quick overview. The P&E and Morfield Yard. This is the near West Side, and the near West Side was packed with railroad activity in the 70s. This was the place to you basically just drove around in circles, seeing what was going on. Belmont Street bisected Morfield Yard. To the right was the yard and the turntable and the roundhouse. To the left was the interchange with the Indianapolis Union and the P&E, and like a secondary staging yard for the B&O. To Springfield, that was the direction to Springfield. So obviously talking about wandering around at night, this is from Mr. Zeman. This is just showing the opportunities to paint with light at night. So this is a long view with the turntable pit, and then obviously a short view. I just love the grain of the old black and white films. Love painting with light. A little compressed view. The engines set on basically an east-west orientation, so you could get different views of the Indianapolis skyline in the background. That was the sand house. They had obviously new wheel sets. Painted the boxcar, painted the side of the building, painted the nose of the locomotive. This one was basically just one flashed the side of the locomotive, and everything else was available light, just a longer time exposure. Using the caboose between the Jeeps, that was four flash bulbs. So people ask me sometimes, well, why back and forth between black and white and color? Well, a lot of times I only had, unless I was borrowing a camera from Tower Studio, I only had one camera. So you would, in the olden days, you would rewind the canister until you didn't get the lead in. You would replace the color film with black and white film because the black and white film was free and the developing was free. Back then a roll of Kodachrome was $5 or $6 to buy, 36 exposure, and it was $5 or $6 to develop with Kodak. So it's like, this is free. So kind of like digital. 1, 2, 3, 4 flash bulbs. Sanding tower. I'm a big, like a lot of us of my generation, big fan of E units and F units, Baldwin and PA, or Baldwin and Alcon cab units, and then GP30s. For whatever reason, EMD hit it out of the park when they designed the GP30. It's just good. Gotta love those Chessie safety yellow cabooses. There was always power, overnight power at Morfield. Gotta love the white flags. So GM50 made a couple of visits to town. I was a big time roster shooter. I was trading roster shots with a guy in New Jersey and in Salt Lake City and in California. There were 4 or 5 guys. So I got lots of roster shots of this stuff, but I know some groups, you can only do so many roster shots. So I got a beautiful roster shot, but I like the juxtaposition with the B&O. And unfortunately, that's the way it went out of town. Didn't go out of town as a leader, they buried it. So, and it wasn't a great day anyway, so I was headed to Cincy. Oh, I call this one Old Salt. This is where the P&E, the P&E's behind the B&O, and then there's the interchange tracks for Indianapolis Union. So there's Indianapolis Union. The P&E locomotives came home there in the mid-70s. They were a lessor railroad to the Big Four in the New York Central. So as it came close to Conrail, a lot of the power went to their home rails for whatever. I don't know if that's for inventory purposes. Nobody could ever really answer that question. But we had P&E all over the place for a period of time. This was auto traffic, interchange auto traffic that went down to the GM plant, the GM Chevy stamping plant. Another view of them pulling a interchange train through. Great place to railfan. Southwest side was the Indianapolis Union Railway shops. They had their own maintenance facility, sanding facility, fueling facility. By this point, the only FM the only H1244 that was left was number 20, which very shortly thereafter went to scrap. So everything that was SW1500s, which was another one of my favorite locomotives. So I tracked them all over town. So tucked behind number 25 is what was number 36, which became the Indianapolis Railway's number 200 for a period of time. That Central Indiana Monon Railroad Club that I was a member of, we painted it. We masked all those colors off, painted it with spray paint, believe it or not. It was a long project, but it was well worth the effort. This is the manual pneumatic crossing Watchman's Tower. This is Belmont Avenue again on the west side. This is Van Junction. So this is where the belt crossed the Tennessee line to St. Louis, and the belt swung around on the south side. This is not my Galaxy, but it's, well, actually, that may be a tree. But that's number 200 and a cab with a guy getting ready. This is going around the horn to the Chevy plant. And that's Woods Tower again, that we saw from the cab. So I think we did a damn good job. It was a really pretty locomotive. We even did a red, white, and blue number board. So we were modelers. We were just modeling in 1-to-1 scale. You can see the legs of the photographer who didn't quite get himself out of the shot, or the flashbulb guy, the invisible phantom there on the right. I don't know who. I don't know which. I don't know if it was me. It could have been me, because what you do is you just would set it up like a 2-minute exposure, and then you just run around like a crazy person firing off flashbulbs. You can see the streaks. You can see how long the timings were. And they washed that unit and washed that unit and washed that. It was awesome. It was pretty much always clean, which for a white locomotive, we appreciated it. Back to black and white. So that was, that would have been the Pennsy. That would have been the Jeeps that would have been going down the I&D. That was the connection for the Indianapolis and Penn Centers in the distance. So this whole area was basically purchased by Eli Lilly and Company in 77 or 78, and this whole thing is nothing but a drug manufacturing complex. There's no indication there was ever a railroad in this area. Of course, the belt became superfluous under Conrail because Conrail owned everything. So IJ Tower was milepost 1 on the Indianapolis to St. Louis line of the Big Four. This is the B&O from the platform of IJ Tower, and that's the home signal. This was the area to the right was called Sankey Hill. There was industries and stuff back in the day. There was a turntable. The original Big Four Union Station roundhouse and turntable was in that geographic area. I've got some 1918 Sanborn maps that are just fascinating. This whole area now is an Indianapolis Zoo. Literally, you go maybe 100 yards to the right, and Washington Street is there. They reroute Washington Street, and then the whole area is Indianapolis Zoo and White River Park. You never knew there was a railroad there. There's a better picture of IJ before the siding was falling off and the roof was caving in, and the latter days, its unfortunate demise. That was a cotton belt run through. It came through Indy for years and years and years. Black and white, post Conrail. or post Penn Central. This is looking the opposite direction. That's the Stout power plant, steam plant. That steam plant powers most of Indianapolis downtown is all powered by steam heat. That plant provides the steam heat, and it was coal fired until not that many years ago. To the right there, that gray building with the rectangular windows was Diamond Chain Factory. It was there from 1860 until 2 years ago. And it was torn down for the Indy 11 Soccer Stadium, which got canceled. So now it's just a wide open field. To the left, you see kind of the burnt out, looks like a burned out bridge. That is a burned out bridge, and that was the Kingham Spur. That whole area on the left that's just scrub grass was at one point the largest slaughterhouse east of the Mississippi. It processed 1,500 cattle a day, and they all came in by rail. There was a whole complex and switching system. They had their own GE 44 tonners. It was crazy. So now we're back looking at the Atlas Hotel. That's the spire of Union Station in the distance. This is literally right across the tracks from IJ. So we go a little bit further west on the St. Louis line. We come to Harding Street. Harding Street was the beginning of Westside Yard, the beginning of the west end of Westside Yard. And Westside Yard back in the day was primarily automobile traffic. There were 3 GM plants that sat south and west of the yard. I mean, they did other set outs, but it was a lot of auto traffic. There was a yard office there. My Uncle Harry worked out of that yard for a couple, 3 years. My grandfather delivered fuel oil for a living, and I, during the summers, would work for free to pull the hose for his oil truck, and we would always see Uncle Harry drove a white Plymouth Valiant that was just as distinctive as, and you would always see it sitting there right off Harding Street. So I always knew he was working. So one day I got a call from Dennis Meeker, and he goes, "You got to get to Westside Yard." And I'm like, "Why? What's going on?" He goes, "It's empty." And I said, "What do you mean it's empty?" He goes, "They sold it to Chevy." He said, "The railroad feels it's superfluous." So I grabbed my view camera, and I grabbed my 35 millimeter camera, and I did a Harding Street view, and then I climbed up the light tower to the top of the light tower, held on for dear life, and did an overview of a completely empty Westside Yard. So on the left is the big 4 mains to St. Louis. The next big red arrow is IJ Tower that we were just at. You can see the Union Station spire, the Stout power generating plant, and then the XPRR main to St. Louis weaves on the other side of the river. You can see the Chevy, that's the original plant, but they built this whole area, became Chevy plant. And it was a monster until 4 or 5 years ago, and GM closed it, and now it's going to become the Elanco Eli Lilly and Company pet division headquarters. They're building a $700 million building in that area. It's crazy. Next west on the Pennsy was transfer yard. And it was always a place to catch. There was almost always a switch engine station there for set outs and pickups. There were lots of Jeeps and lots of SJ1500s. Good place to, they laid over at night with their shoving platforms and their cabooses. So great night shots. And transfer yards just recently started being used. Indiana Railroad has trackage rights. They come up the belt, get on at Dale, come up through across Union Station, and they exchange their TOFC cars, their well cars, and their high cube cars with CSX at that yard. A little bit farther west on the New York Central line, this is Girls School Road. Nice little telly. You can see empty auto racks, autos. A little bit further west on the Avon line, There were two bridges that are called the haunted bridges or the twin bridges. Some of the locals call them twin bridges. Supposedly there were two construction workers that were killed when this bridge was built in like 1906, and they haunt the bridge. You know, the locals say it's just the wind blowing through those channels in the bridge that makes for that sound. Trees, you can get some really nice tree shots if you're into arborists, which is, you know, unfortunately that's part of all the lines now. P&E switcher was at Avon for a while, and they had a big hook 24-hour 7 that was stationed at Avon. Yeah, steam. Yeah, absolutely. It was awesome. Just to listen to it sit there and chug. Of course, Avon, you know, pre 9/11, you know, basically you just went in and checked with the yard master. He said, steer clear, moving traffic, don't get hurt, and you could shoot anything you want. Now you go in there and the railroad police show up before you show up. One of the neat pusher sets that was there for a while was SD7s and GP9Bs from the Penn. That was just freaking awesome. Later on, for probably 2 decades, the Penn Central had ordered specially equipped SD38s, and they installed those at most of the major Penn Central humps. And the unique feature for them was they had 6 brake cylinders per truck versus 4 for a standard SD38. So, yeah, this is back to P&E was a leased railroad. It was a 100-year lease with the Big Four. So it was pretty fun to have solid strings of P&E Jeeps for a while leading up to the 76 Conrail takeover. Another couple of unique locomotives that, right, you can tell I'm a locomotive guy. There were 2 specially ballasted SD9s that the Pennsylvania Railroad made, 60. I can't remember what the original numbers were. I think it was 5998, 5999, but they became the Penn Central, the 6000 series. But they chugged around with, at this time, there were still Avon to Hawthorne transfers, daily transfers. And then eventually Hawthorne got closed and is only just for local switching. This is at the west end of Avon Yard. It's called Dan Jones Road. It actually now has it goes above. It doesn't really have railfan ports in the fence, but it does have a view of the west end of the yard. You can see from the deferred maintenance, it didn't, those tracks look like spaghetti in pre-Conrail. So Conrail's here now. There were solid strings of GP20s that were running around ex-New York Central, and that was fun. They were typically going down the I&V and the lighter branch lines with local traffic. So back to Dennis Meeker. Now we're on the near south side of Indianapolis. The Illinois Central built a yard that was connected with the Indianapolis Union, right under basically Raymond Street. You can see the yard from Raymond Street if you look north. So Dennis was raised in Mattoon, Illinois on the New York Central, became a lifelong rail fan, was a timetable collector extraordinaire. When he was like 7 years old, he started writing to the railroads, to their maintenance, or to their operating people, basically saying, I'm Dennis Meeker, I'm an aspiring railroad employee, I'm a young kid, and they would send him the division timetables from the railroad. So at the point that he was in 1975, he had an apartment on the near south side, close to where my apartment was. He had a 3-bedroom apartment. 2 of the 3 bedrooms were floor-to-ceiling timetables from every railroad across the United States. Unfortunately, he passed away. He was a heavy guy, heavy smoker. He passed away, but his whole collection of timetables did get donated and saved by the Monticello Valley Railroad Museum. So Another story, Joe Haas in the blue cap. In 1975, in the early 1975, I filled out an application to go to work for the Illinois Central Gulf. I like Dennis, I like Joe, I like being around the railroads. Why not go to work for the railroad? So I filled it out, passed the physical. They were going to hire me on as a car knocker, and I went to talk to my mom and dad, and they're like, no. They're like, we've set aside some money. If you're willing to work through college, you can go to college. You know, if college doesn't work out, you can go to work for the railroad, but you're not going to work for the railroad and not go to college. So long story short, I ended up going to IU in June of 75 and never looked back, never went to work for the railroad. So this was at the time a brand new unit coal train. The Indianapolis Power and Light Company, Epalco, was the short moniker for it. They were sending a daily 80-car, eventually 110-car unit coal train to the Minnehaha mine in southern Indiana and return. And those were the yellow cars. They had the ready kilowatt on them. It was a neat train. This was another locomotive engineer that befriended me. His name was Ross Vickery. He lived on the south side of Indy, and he operated the day train. I am one Indianapolis. That's terrible. I am one in MI2. I can't think of what the M stands for. Anyway, so obviously it was welcome at Illinois Central Gulf at night. So took advantage of that. Got up in the cab and changed the indicator to red to actually changed the indicator to green on the other one, but it didn't come out very well. I was going to do a Christmas card one year, but it didn't turn out so well. So like to pose them near the sand tower so you can get some depth of field and some interest in the photograph. Got a call from Dennis. There's a bunch of renting units here. You need to come see them. So I did, and they were going to Paducah to be rebuilt. And it's funny, it turned out they couldn't get in them. The cabs were all locked and they'd welded Reading switch locks as a locking device for all the cabs, and they couldn't get in them to do any kind of work. So knowing Bud McMahon, I called Bud McMahon and I said, who in central Indiana, because he was a closeted rail fan, who in central Indiana would have a Reading key? And he goes, oh, that's easy. He said, that's the terminal superintendent of Avon Yard has like 500 switch locks and keys. So we went over, got a Reading key, opened up all the cabs, and I got a couple of Verser levers and some little mementos from my time. So we could go back to the map. Actually, I think I put the map in there. So you can see the belt, you can see the Illinois Central. The belt went over the top of the Illinois Central, but from that orange line north to Union Station was this wood trestle. Now they discontinued passenger service in the 30s. I don't know. Nobody could tell me when the last time they put a train through there. It was a detour train, but I think it was in the 60s. But it sat there. It didn't get dismantled until like 78, and it was a mile and a half long. It's crazy, and it was so short. Trucks were always getting their cabs taken off and stuff because of the shortness of it. So there's the over-under. There's the Indianapolis Union on top, the IC on the bottom. This is the interchange track with the belt. It's obviously got two IC trains on it, probably the local and the being passed by the. So there's the IU guys coming to pick them up. There's my 70 Galaxy 500. The scrap yard is still there, processing scrap. I'm going to speed up a little bit here because I just realized it's 10 to 9. This is the southbound ready kilowatt train with a GM&O third unit out. Southbound south of Division Street in Greenwood. This was another cab ride with Bud. This is a really neat story too because we went up the P&E and we switched American Arc Clay. There was a DuPont plant up there, but the P&E line went directly by the Indianapolis 500 on the south side and right down through downtown Speedway, and there was a Steak and Shake on the south side of the tracks. We stopped, pulled up right up to the road, pulled the engine. We all went to Steak and Shake and ate. It was just like it was a restaurant, or just like it was the railroad restaurant. And then we all came back, and they took naps in the cab while I went around and took pictures. Or in the caboose, they all took naps for their lunch break. I thought this was interesting. The DuPont one was a car-coated poison. So I don't know what we were taking in and out of. Well, it says anti-knock compound right on the. So that's a view out of the back of the cab at SW1500. Bud always had his pipe, smoking his pipe. This one, we were going up the Illinois Central, or the New York Central Main. Rock Island Refinery was at the end of the line. This is a couple pictures from the cab, a couple different days. That's Belmont Street and Belmont Street and Morfield Yard. So we're on the P&E, the belt's in the middle, and B&O's on the left. So this is Zionsville Road up in what's called Park 100 on the north side of Indy, back when they all still had rail service. That's the end of the line on what was the Cincinnati to Chicago, Indianapolis main line of the New York Central, 79 mile per hour territory back in the day. Okay, home rails. I'm way behind. Home rails was Bloomington for the next 4 years. This is Martinsville, Southern Indiana. That's the string, some of the GP20s we talked about. The Floridian, Amtrak Floridian ran through Bloomington for a number of years. It was a nighttime train through Bloomington, so anytime you heard anything, any scuttlebutt about it being late, Railfanning community was out in full force. This was the Schaefer. Schaefer was on this trip, Mike Schaefer. Stretching out south of Bloomington. This is Dillman Road in Bloomington, on the curve just by the wastewater treatment plant. 3 dome cars that day. Man, to be able to go back that way. The Bloomington Depot sits right up on top of Walnut Street. This is just obviously a compressed telephoto. A little cab action through the freight house and the depot, Bloomington. 1776, we were able to get it, pull it off the train that night and do some night photography, which was marvelous. And we followed it all the way from Sullivan, Indiana, all the way to Indianapolis. So got a whole series of really good snow photographs. This is Bloomington with the siding, the Bloomington siding track, and then the scale track. We set out a unit there. The guy in the orange vest with his arm out, that's Dick Koenig. He drew the straw to ride it from Sullivan to Bloomington. I'm not sure how he finagled that. So this is Richland Creek Viaduct, also called Tulip Trestle. This is the one that you guys see on YouTube feeds and everything. It's still there, still functioning, still the longest steel trestle in Indiana. It doesn't look that pretty, and it also is a lot more treed in. There's a viewing station that was built there. It's a really nice place to watch trains. Unfortunately, there's only 2 trains a day. Manual track work around Bloomington. Back then, they didn't have all the fancy machines. Night shots at McDowell. This is on the ex-Monon, L&M by this point. Little street shot. Yes. Yes. Terminated at Wisconsin Street Yards on the south side of Indy. Everything was interchange traffic via the belt. The P&E West part of it is still in existence. Part of it's still used by Amtrak out of Indy. They come out at Hunt, they bend around at Hunt, and they come up to North Hunt, and then they get on the P&E to Crawfordsville, and then they get off on the Monon. This is a Clear Creek Depot. This is the first station, was the first train order station south of Bloomington before you get to Harrodsburg. Getting into Harrisburg Curve. Gotta have some cow shots. Southbound on the Monon coming under the old State Road 37 bridge. Beautiful poured concrete arch bridge. There's the arch bridge. I'm standing on New 37, which is has a huge elevation through that part of southern Indiana. There's the set of semaphores at Harrisburg. Now we're at Thornton, which was a meeting point for a lot of trains. It was a nice long siding on the Monon. The trains on the siding. This is the Milwaukee Road, the Jasonville to Seymour line curving through Bedford. Street running in Bedford. The blades at Mitchell. So the Monon I was telling Bill, the Monon from Mitchell down to New Albany is now the Monon South Trail, a 53-mile trail that's being done in pieces on the old Monon road. So now we're on East-West line. We're on the O&M. Pacing shot on State Road 60. There's a huge concrete plant at Shoals. It's now like tripled the size. It's the only reason why that line is really left operating with a daily local. Milepost 175, milepost 175 with an old tipple. Washington, Indiana. I don't know if you guys can see it or not, but do you see the little swooshes, the red, white, and the yellow swooshes going back and forth? Can you guys see that on the depot? Yeah. That's called a double exposure from a roll of film that I exposed at a bowling alley. So those are bowling pins on the right. When you rewound the old cameras, you counted off the number of frames. Well, sometimes you got off on your count, so you end up double exposing the film. Going way back. Seymour, picking up orders. This is close to Crothersville. This is near Washington, Indiana. Going to get a little bit of Milwaukee. This is the Milwaukee coming in on their line. This is after the L&N merger. They got trackage rights on the Monon from this point to into Louisville, in the Youngtown Yard. This is off of the signal at the Bedford Depot. This is the northbound Milwaukee getting ready to. Yeah, this is the old Monon. Yeah, what's left of the paint of the old Monon freight station. There was another team track that came up here. GM Foundry in Bedford had a 3-trick-a-day job up until the like 1980. It's crazy. The GM Foundry still survives, but no restaurants. Rear end coming through. So there was the precursor snow to the blizzard of '79. Mike Schaefer was in town in Bloomington. He told Ron Potch and I, he said, you want to go shoot night shots at Hiawatha? And we're like, sure. That was the craziest ride that I've ever taken. He drove a VW minibus, and he drove like a bat out of hell through snow, through sleet, through ice. We got there, we got back. We got some great photographs. Actually, he did a trains article on this some years back. So 83C there on the left is one of the Fairtrain locomotives that I purchased for the Indiana Transportation Museum. We bought 4 locomotives from the Milwaukee Road in 1983. This was 83A, 83C, and SE3. This was the slug unit that worked between the Jasonville Yard and Chicago on the Milwaukee Road. Jump over to just slightly north of Hiawatha. We got Terre Haute, a couple shots. Conrail, Penn Central. This tower has been moved to the other side of the tracks and now is a museum with a Spring Hill Tower. So talking about cab rides, I'd heard that they had newly painted RS2 rebuilds at the Duggar mine of the Peabody Coal Company. So I'm like, gotta go. So went down there and I'm taking pictures, and eventually they stopped and waved me over. And I'm like, I'm gonna get kicked out. They're like, what are you doing here? I'm taking pictures. I'm a rail fan. I'm from Indianapolis, and I've heard you got these beautiful locomotives. And small talk ensued. They found out that my uncle was a deceased engineer for New York Central, and they're like, come up here. You can ride with us for a while. So I got my only Alco RS2 rides around the Peabody coal mine. Linton, Indiana. This is crossing the Illinois Central Gulf. Milwaukee, crossing the Illinois Central Gulf. Yeah,
second line gets down to Bedford.
It would eventually get to Bedford, yes. This is 74, so it was pretty active to Bedford at that point in time. Mighty Railroad Club in Indianapolis, or in Bloomington, was able to get access to an open house at Crane. We were able to ride this Red Rock Blue train and get a shop tour. They had all Baldwin locomotives. It was wonderful. Speaking of bicentennials, we were in Evansville to shoot some other stuff, and we could see this train in the distance, and it looked just like just a single locomotive. We're like, what the hell's going on? So we drove up that way. The fellow in the cab is Mr. Hart, who was the road foreman of engines for the Seaboard Coastline, and he was shuttling this locomotive downtown, and they set up steps and everything on both sides of the locomotive so kids could go through. It was basically a tour of the locomotive downtown. We just happened to be in town. We got it. One of the tunnels in Indiana is Duncan Tunnel on the southern. Back when you could reasonably easily get down there, it's not so fun anymore. Eastbound and westbound, going in and out of the tunnel. Chasing them across the flatlands around English. Alger, Windsors, and Western. At night, they locked up the shop, so you could do anything here at night you wanted to. K&IT Bridge, the Monon coming off the K&IT. For a while, there were 2 or 3 of the C636s. The Illinois Central only had 5 of them, and they were on the coal line between Louisville and Paducah. And we went down there and shot primarily night shots. I don't know that I can't find any daytime active shots, just rosters. Also that time, the K&IT still was an independent railroad, and that's where all the B&O, the Monon, the Southern, all congregated, much like the Indianapolis Union. The K&IT handled all the interline traffic, and that's their bicentennial. Auto Train in 74 was building a new terminal that the Floridian would eventually, they would cohabitate in, and obviously they don't even have the roof on yet. So, but the Auto Train was a big deal there for a while, from there to Sanford, Florida. Chicagoland, good stuff in Chicago. Milwaukee Road, the fueling station in Bensenville. Just serendipity, we caught the first American Eagle at Rockford, Illinois, in the darkness almost. James Wicker Riley coming out of the station from Roosevelt Road. An E8 and a Pooch getting ready to go out on some train. I believe that's the Panama Limited. I haven't been able to verify that. Back when we had tail cars on trains. Back when there were still some Santa Fe units at 21st Street that were protection power. The Santa Fe was the only one to roster an H1244 TS, which stood for terminal switcher. It had steam generator in the nose. Back when you could walk the tracks outside Union Station in Chicago and just have free reign. The Crandall cab at Northwestern Union Station. I love it. I love it. It's so ugly. There were still some E6s running around at that point on Rock Island Commuter Service out on South Street. This one survived. It's been repainted a couple times. It's owned by the Midland Railway in Texas. State Line Tower, largest tube-style interlocker, I think, in the United States. Required 3 operators and 2 levermen. Served the CINL, the Penn, the Erie, the Nickel Plate, the BNOCT, the CNWI, the Indianapolis Harbor Belt, who was the owner of the interlocking, Michigan Central, Chicago Calumet Terminal, and Chicago and South Shore. That was the place. Speaking of places, so Joliet, Illinois. Obviously, you had all of the Santa Fe traffic, you had all the GM&O traffic, east and westbound, and then you had all the Rock Island traffic, railroad north and south at that point. Yeah.
So,
that's a Herald. That's a 5-foot presidential Herald. Oh, just that was their freight scheme. Yeah, oh, well, some people call them yellow bonnets. Yeah, because obviously the passenger units were red bonnets. So, the Rock Island Rocket. At Joliet, you had local rock switching and interchange, and then you had the EJ&E. And I was just over the moon to get a VO 1000 still operating. It was like mind blown. Baldwins were scarce as hinge teeth. FP 45 on the main line, back when they were still using E units and in the passenger commuter service. Grainy black and white, I'm not sure, one of the Hiawatha's. So in Bensonville Yard, you always wanted to swing by Bensonville when you were in town because they took the interchange from Milwaukee to the units that were coming out of Beloit, the remanufacturers from Fairbanks Morse would come through there. So I was able in my time to get 2. This one's just beautiful, and that one's more beautiful. So, I mean, they couldn't have been in service more than a couple of days. They had no dirt on them whatsoever. Back on the racetrack. So GMO had their own Southside yard called Glen Yard, and Dennis Dunkman's dad drove us up there, and we spent the day around Chicago. A lot of those other Union Station shots were on that same trip. So they were using, ancient Alcos as their switch goats. One of my best pan shots in a yard, slow speed pan shots that I've ever done. Makes it look like it's really going fast. So the Indiana University Railroad Club got a tour of Markham because of Ron Potts working for the IC. So got a really old GM&OF, got a switcher, or got a mainline freight coming past Markham. So we got a call that the RDCs were going to go off. Mike Schaefer called and said the RDCs were going to go off with Blackhawk. So we went to Galena. We did some night shots. We did some day shots. This is the one I like the most. We also got some freights coming by. So Galena was one of the oldest towns in Illinois, right on the river. Some commuter action. This is the Rock Islands Independence, there by Centennial. We caught it in a number of different places. So now we're into the whatever it was, pre-Metro. I can't think of the name of it. So we're able to catch the rock units. This is at Silvis, Illinois, on the turntable. Got to have another E unit in there. This is a freight at Silvis. New rock and old rock at Silvis. You can see the rock usually spend a lot of money on their maintenance. Anytime we had an E unit, we took it in any number of different poses. This is at Bureau, Illinois. The Rock Island rocket and the Quad Cities rocket timetable were about half an hour each way in the morning, each way in the afternoon. So we went there early in the morning and were able to catch both ways action. I like that one. No right turn. Really? This is a Railfanning Indianapolis trip. We got out of shops in Michigan City and rode downtown to Randolph Street and return on a really cold January 1975. I like this one because it's the only combine coach that I ever photographed. They only had 5 of them. This is the Illini, which I believe this is Bloomington, Illinois station. It looks like the GM&O and the didn't do a good job of labeling all my slides. The shops in Bloomington. You can see the IC is taken over by this point, and they had to replace a grab iron. They did a really bad job of cutting it off. It's a butcher job. Sanding Tower. Galesburg, Illinois was a meeting point for some run-throughs. I like this because I had the old, the new Burlington. Griffith back in the day was the place. C&O of Indiana, EJ&E, Erie, Lackawanna, the PC, the Michigan Central, and the Grand Trunk. So you took your pick. That's the Michigan Central line. Erie was running a lot of re-geared E units and F units at that point. And you had the orange units and the re-engined center cabs on the EJ&E. The operators at Griffith were pretty amenable to giving you lineups. Grand Trunk. So now we're back in Indiana. This is the James Whitcomb Riley in '73 when it was on the C&O of Indiana when they were running F units. That was the station stop right at the crossing. Huntington, Indiana was a division point for Erie, Lackawanna. So all trains changed crews. So you could always, give you an opportunity to take multiple shots. Trains in this particular situation, they're setting out and picking up. Setting out and picking up. SD45 got 11. Local switch engine. Erie had nice smoky alcos. They crossed the Wabash up there just north of Huntington. This is the C&O yard office in Peru. This was the station stop for the Riley in Peru. Sanding Tower. I like this one just because I like the Chesed Cat. South Trip. You guys are hanging with me, so I'll just keep plowing through until you say, "Uh-oh." Targets were American Freedom Train. Obviously, it ran all over the United States during the 75-76 period. We followed it from Peachtree Station in Atlanta to Salisbury, North Carolina. We did night shots and day shots. Beautiful locomotive. Ross Rowland, wonderful man. Nothing like red, white, blue steam locomotives to get a rail fan's heartbeat. So the Southern Crescent was kind of like the Rock Island. The Southern Crescent, the Southern opted out of Amtrak. So through the period of 71 through 76 or 77, the Southern operated their own passenger trains outside of Amtrak. And they crossed roughly, they were supposed to cross at Salisbury. So, if you went to Salisbury, you had a good chance of seeing more than one passenger train. So in this particular situation, this was a night shot. This is the tail end of the Freedom Train, the observation car, and that's Gary Dozal, the ghost, there on the left, doing his flash. I think you can see him catch him. So obviously, green and white and gold shows up really well. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 flashes. Went through flash bulbs like they were going out of style. This was the old Fort Sloops excursion that the Southern ran for a number of years out of Old Forts, North Carolina. Beautiful scenery. The Clinchfield, we made 2 trips to the Clinchfield. Did some day and night photography. It was tough shooting during the day. And when the trains ran, it seemed like it was always high noon, or it was always not high noon, but it was off. The shadows were off. So, but we did get some decent shots. I like that because of the kudzu taking over. So one of these trips was specifically to go to the Columbus and Greenville because Gary Dozal and Steve Dozal were writing a book on Baldwins, and they wanted to have some firsthand photographs of the Baldwins. And at this point in time, they were 6 Baldwins and 2 EMDs, so you had a good chance of getting Baldwins on the road. So we did night shots and day shots. This is downtown Maben, Mississippi, population, I think like 12. I liked it because of the flag and the guy watering the flowers. It just was perfect. The Islam shops on GM&O, huge glass-fronted locomotive shops, back shop for the south end of the GM&O. Wood pulp loading facility just north of Jackson. Central City, Kentucky. I like this because you got the waving hands that say protect them, and then the engineers waving or the fireman's waving too. So it's like, hey, I got all kinds of hands going on. This is on the main line, I think south of Effingham, when the GP 38-2s were brand spanking new. This is in Paducah, when the Paducah yard still had a bunch of old Black Widow, Green Diamond, Jeeps running around. We got a tour of the back shop at Paducah, and this is the monster Alco engine that's about to go back in 1100 that's sitting behind it. It's been completely remanufactured by Alco and was delivered back to. So this is the first bicentennial, the first ICG 1776, the first one, Dave. It was 9510 that was converted. This is the one I have all my pictures of. It hit a oil truck and killed the engineer, and obviously burnt the unit to crisp. Now this is around Carbondale, Illinois. This is Effingham, Illinois. This was a Railfanning Indianapolis trip. This is Glenn King filming, and he's picking up orders. This is an East trip real quick. They called this the vomit rocket. That's what the guys called it that rode in it, the 4 guys that rode in it. Harrisburg at night. Harrisburg at day. The last Baldwin operating on Conrail was stationed in Harrisburg. One of the reasons we went to Harrisburg. Expensive. Seaboard, it was the Pennsylvania Reading Seashore Line. Obviously, I'm a Baldwin freak. More Harrisburg. That's where they transitioned from electric to diesel. Perrysville, Maryland. We poked around Maryland looking for GG1s, which we found some because they were the twilight of their career at that point. They'd signed a contract to buy the AEMD units. Takes a lot of flash bulbs to line up a locomotive that size. Harrisburg Station. It's even worse when it's a black locomotive. Harrisburg Curve, we had to take a tour there. Obviously, it's a lot treat in, and now they don't want you trespassing on the tracks. Coming up the grade. Night shot of a pooch at Clifton Forge, Virginia. Engineer at Clifton Forge. Looks like he was all business. We took a real quick round trip to Hagerstown because they still had BL2s in service. And being a Monon fan, BL2s were very close to our hearts. So they had it tied to a slug unit, and it was the yard switcher. It was cool. I wish they'd closed the nose door, but it is what it is. The beautiful station at White Sulphur Springs that was built to serve the Greenbrier Hotel, which the CNO also owned. Coming out of the Fort Springs Tunnel, which was built late in 1947 to eliminate a bunch of curves and a bunch of gradient changes. Double track tunnel. For a while, when the GP39s were new, they were serviced around Russell, Kentucky. There was always new and old units. I like this SD18. This one eventually ended up on Indiana Railroad because it had the eyes and the mouth somebody put on the front. Pretty cool. This was a one-off that we caught in Harrisburg. It was called GM 6C, a 6,000 horsepower demo and testbed unit that was built in response to the 1970s energy crisis. None were sold. None were ordered. GM lost their ass on that. So we're getting towards the end here. I have a question for the group. Which Sunset Lane? So now I can label my slide because I just had Chevy at Hill. So I'm like,
Yep.
Sunset Hill. Thank you. That is the end.
Thank you for watching. To learn more about the Cincinnati Railroad Club, visit our website, cincinnati.rrclub.org. And you can support programs like this by becoming a member of the club as well. Learn more at our website, cincinnati.rrclub.org. And while you're here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to our YouTube channel.